Morning, everyone. I can see people waiting in the lobby and joining, so we're just going to give a couple of minutes for everyone to join on this grey morning. I don't know what it's like where you are, but anyway, very much grey down here on the south coast. So yeah, we're just going to give a couple of minutes for everyone to join, and then we'll crack on. And thanks for joining. I was never sure whether to do some sort of hold music for this sort of time. A couple of minutes of, I don't know, some Muzak, some lift music, as they used to say.
Maybe you could sing as a song, Steph.
Maybe I could sing you a song, Paul. No, I don't think that's what anyone needs at 11 o'clock on a November morning. I know we're all expecting fireworks at some point today, but no, I don't think you need me to launch into Britney Spears or anything like that.
Okay.
Morning, those of you just joining. I'm just saying we're just going to give a couple of minutes for everyone to join us, and then we will crack on. I hope wherever you are today, the sun is shining. Boothie, Sarah Booth, who I'll be introducing properly in a minute, has just got back from a week in Lanzarote. So she was just saying before you all joined that she was definitely feeling the return to the United Kingdom and that it was surprisingly cold.
Yes, which is not something I usually feel being a menopausal woman. I'm usually running at least 10 degrees hotter than everybody else.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad you said that, Sarah, and not me. And also with your northern heritage as well, I would have thought, generally temperature's not an issue.
Yeah, it's not something I usually do, is go straight to the heating and crank it up.
What temperature did you go for?
At 21. Mine's usually sat at 19. But yeah, we went for 21. It's not now, it's back down to 19 now. Now I've fully, as my US colleagues say, acclimated to the current
Acclimated. Nice word. Right then, I can see we've still got a couple of joiners, but let's crack on because I know we've got you until 11:45, hopefully. So good morning, everyone. My name's Stefan and I'm the Chief Customer Officer at Predyktable. So for those of you that have not come across us before, we help businesses that operate warehouses to optimize their workforce plans so they can control costs and protect service. So that's us in a nutshell. That's as much of a pitch as you'll get today. I'm sure you'll be glad to know. A bit of an overview how we do it. So we take historic and actual data, order volumes, workforce productivity, factor in constraints, so SLAs, budgets, capacity, and then effectively the product balances those different priorities and models how things interact to produce workforce plans that can flex during the day as things change and also be used to model future scenarios, future what ifs. So it's the subject today is very close to our hearts and my heart. I'm not the talent today, as it were. The talent are the two people I'm about to introduce. Sarah Booth, who you might have heard me refer to as Boothie, that's how everyone seems to know her in the industry, and Paul Hunter. So before we crack on, Sarah, would you just like to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Sarah Booth. I'm currently the Logistics Director for Martin Brower in the UK and Ireland. So we partner with McDonald's and Papa John's, managing a multi-temperature distribution network across 6 DCs. I've spent nearly 30 years. I do have a great face cream, so I know I don't look it. I've spent almost 30 years in logistics, working across operations, strategy and transformation. And what really interests me now is how data and technology can make planning simpler, smarter and more human. And like for most operators, I've spent plenty of my career inside or reviewing other people's Excel spreadsheets. So this topic for me feels very close to home, and I'm quite excited to discuss that with you today.
Super. And Paul?
Yeah. Hi everyone. I don't have Sarah's face cream, unfortunately. So my 40-ish years of work has just completed. I retired earlier this year, or semi-retired as it's turned out to be. I spent almost 30 years with TJX, which, if you don't know TJX, that's TK Maxx and HomeSense. whereas the group supply chain director for the last 15 years of my time there, looking after the network across inbound across the world, outbound to 750 stores, and more pertinently for this conversation, I guess I had responsibility for 6 big DCs in the UK and across Europe. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Super, thank you. Thanks both. So bit of housekeeping before we get into things. If there are any questions that come up as we're chatting, just please drop them into the Q&A. We'll endeavour to cover at least a couple of them by close of play. Anything we don't cover, we will follow up on afterwards. And if you're happy for it, share the question and the answer to the broader group. So a little bit of scene settings. And I think Boothie and Paul just alluded to it really. You know, labour is one of the biggest costs in any warehouse operation. And most planning teams have built strong foundations to manage the workforce using tools they trust. And those tools are often Excel, whiteboards in some cases. And those tools have kept operations running through periods of huge change, particularly over the past few years. So what we're talking about today is how to build on that strength. Boothie just mentioned this. How can we use data and technology to make planning quicker, smarter and more connected? And the idea is that we're all about giving experienced teams more time to focus on the why and the what next. And I think something that somebody very senior at a 3PL said to me last week, I think is quite pertinent. He said, we need to start treating labour as an opportunity and not just a challenge. And I think that's quite an interesting view. So let's dive into that. So Sarah, I'll direct this at you first of all. So what do you think is the biggest opportunity in labour planning today? Something that could really move the dial if it got more attention?
I think the biggest opportunity in labour planning is moving from static plans to live plans, intelligent ones. I mentioned it earlier in my intro, most of us still rely on Excel, and to be fair, that's served us incredibly well. It's flexible, it's easily built, it's quick, and every planner and every operation I've ever worked in all know how to use it and how to adapt it. But it can become really clunky as soon as things start changing. So once you've built your plan, it's hard to flex, and what you're not getting is that real-time visibility, not actually seeing what's actually happened versus what you expected, or being able to test different what-if scenarios without spending hours in the detail of, you know, reviewing additional models. When I think of some of the planning that my teams have done over the years in preparation for Christmas peaks or for Black Fridays, you're running with a really small amount of what-if scenarios, and everything's based on a number of assumptions, and they're quite broad-based assumptions as opposed to really getting into a granular level of detail. So the opportunity for me now is to take all that experience that we have from the people that understand our operations, the people that do that planning, and make it faster and smarter and more dynamic. So imagine instead of working through tabs and loads of macros, planners had a model that could challenge their thinking and suggest possibilities. So using predictive analytics, using some of the information from history, and using that latest live data and performance. So something that could instantly show you what happens if volume moves 5% up, or if a team is short-staffed in a particular area, or if you were to cross-train between functions. So really being able to use that more as a tool as to just, rather than just being able to process volume and going through that tactical, bringing product in, getting it out on time, being able to do that as efficiently as possible and actually have that as part of your business continuity planning, if you like, that whole, what if this happens, what if that happens? It's being that much more intelligent, dynamic approach for me is where I think the opportunity is.
Yeah, that absolutely resonates with some of the conversations I've had. And I think, you know, the big thing that always, I think people feel like they've got a reasonable chance of planning ahead, but actually how do you react to change? And it's the change that really seems to cripple most businesses. It's handling change on a daily basis. Why do you think it's been hard for operators to focus on that up to now? It feels that this is very much, I'm having more conversations where people are saying, we're now having somebody dedicated to workforce strategy at a sort of an operational level. Why do you think now it's coming to the fore?
I think it's because the technology's changed, because the introduction of AI, that technology being available. So the reason it's been hard to focus on until now is Excel works. Excel does what you need it to do, but and therefore operations like something they can move with quite quickly and something they can trust. And there's nothing more more empowering and trusting if you've built a spreadsheet, if you've understood how it works. So I think using something new like AI can sometimes feel like the unknown, and therefore there's a bit of nervousness. Apologies, I think we're having our trees or something cut outside, so I don't know if you can pick up some of that noise.
It's all right.
But I think the other reason is you don't always get that time to, that breathing space to rethink how you can plan. There's always something urgent that's going on in the day, so you set your plan off, you start with that, and it's being able to adapt, being able to do something different with that. So I think it's almost that trust in the unknown, people really feeling that a new system can do what their Excel spreadsheet can do, because they've built it, they've understood it, they know the assumptions, they know what's pulled that together. So it can feel really quite intimidating, or they feel like there's a human judgment that's absolutely necessary that you can still use, and that you're not going to get that with AI. So I think it's that piece around trusting and understanding how that technology is formed, and what the basis of it is, and what those assumptions are that enable you to move forward.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think there's a lot of, I'll say noise, it's probably an unfair term. There's lots of talk about AI in a very sort of AI term, as a very broad term. And I think that comes with a lot of worries for some people as well. Our take on it very much is that you've got to keep the human in the loop. There's incredible expertise in those teams that have been running operations for years. And we all know that, businesses already feel that key person dependency. Our take on, I think a COO said to us about a month or so ago, I want my best person to have their best day every day. That's why I'm interested in AI. How can it help them do that? So thinking about culture for a second, you've just almost called it out. Even in high performing operations, planning teams are having to react very quickly to real time changes. Paul, I'm interested, I think, more on your take on this. So how can leaders create a culture that balances agility with more forward looking planning?
Yeah, thanks, Steph. I think it's interesting that you use the word culture in the question, because I think it is a culture change for all the reasons that Sarah described about what the world looks like today, and how much store is in Excel expertise and people's gut feeling and all of those things that anybody who's run an operation or been in an operation, you know who those people are. They're the go-to people who can always solve the problem. I remember, just a slight aside, when Sarah talked about what ifs, and I remember asking a question of one of my planning teams: what if we did this? What if we did that? And in the best way possible, because it was the environment we were in and it was the tools they had. They said it's going to take us about 6 hours to run the answer to that question, which I kind of needed the answer to that question in sort of an hour, maybe 2 hours at the most. But it's an indication of just how difficult it is to be reactive, properly reactive, in a world where the data is not very smart, and it relies on complex spreadsheets that often fall over and often take ages to update. So I think the reason I think culture is important is there's a real change process to go on here, because all of those people that Sarah describes are the people who are the experts. Their reason for being is being the expert in how to solve some of these things using the tools that they've got. So I think the opportunity for us is to kind of free them up from doing that work, to make, I think you said, Steph, that kind of let humans make human decisions and let humans do the things that only humans can do. But I think the starting point is, when trying to build a culture around this stuff, is to acknowledge where we're at and not dismiss where we're at. It's very easy to get into this conversation of the stuff we've done before is all a bit Heath Robinson, and it's not great, and there's some great stuff out there that's going to fix everything. Now, we might say that's true, but actually, if you're in that role and you're doing that job, that's not the conversation we should be having. The conversation is to acknowledge where we are and what a great job it's done. Of lots of businesses have survived a long time by planning this way. So it's not broken. It's about how it could move forward. And I think the way to, once acknowledging those people and that journey so far, I think it's important to describe to people the why. Why would we want it? Why would we want it to be different? And I think there's a number of things on that. And we're all businesses are trying to, in one way or another, have similar sets of metrics, similar things they're trying to achieve. And I think if you break this down into, we all want to reduce our costs and hit our budgets. We all want to increase productivity. We all want to give a better and more flexible experience for our employees. We all need to hit the SLAs, whatever that looks like, internal or external, that we've got to, make sure that the operation is working correctly. And whoever the customer is, we all need to satisfy the customer, whether, that's a customer who's going into a store or a shop and buying something, or it's, if you're a 3PL, it's your customer and then that customer. So there's multiple layers to all of that. But I think linking everything back to the reason we're having this conversation is because these things are really important to us. And I don't think at the moment anybody really needs much of an explanation about the circumstances that we're working in and some of the challenges there are on costs and volatility and changing dynamics of the workforce and what have you. So I think framing that and taking people on the journey with you, so people, you said it, people don't feel like they're just going to be replaced by a system, because they're not. And in this world, I can't imagine as a senior leader in a supply chain function ever handing all of that over to a system that's just going to do everything. That fills me full of dread. What doesn't fill me full of dread is providing me and the team with better information, timely information, to be able to make decisions we need to make, and doing all of the hard work in the background on all of those what if scenarios and this kind of dynamic planning with more live information. So I think there's an element of that engagement and taking everybody on the journey and tying it back to, we want to make this a better place for all of us, whether it's the costs or it's the experience of those employees are doing that kind of work. Then I think it's about understanding what technologies are out there. What could those, if you make the leap to, there must be something out there that can help us with this, is exploring what would that be, who can help, how could that help, and how would it talk to those 5 or 6 areas that are important to the business and the operation, and where would it help? But I think the engagement with the teams, the stakeholdering with the rest of the business, because this isn't really about the kind of detail of what we're going to do. This is about creating that culture that says we're going to move from here to here. And, we've seen lots of experience of things, really good things, falling over because we're not having the right conversations. We're not saying the team, we're not doing the right research into what the answer to it might be. And, to your point, Steph, this AI thing that people talk about, I think part of the challenge is, which I think the discussions of this are useful in that, he's been able to take that to say, well, AI is a thing, and people get a bit scared of it, and they read the press that it's going to, take away everybody's jobs and all that kind of stuff. Actually narrowing it down into, here's a specific problem that lots of people have got, that we think there's some technology that can help with that, I think is a much more compelling story to be having.
It's interesting you talking as well about.
Sorry, Steph, just adding. I was going to say, just adding to that, as Paul's absolutely right. I think it is that storytelling. It's what's in it for me as a planner, what's in it for me as a business. And when you look at the amount of work that goes into pulling together resourcing plans and labour plans, it starts with the data that you receive. So many of us will get data from customers that talk about orders, and it's not even in our language to start looking at labour planning. So there's a huge amount of work and effort that goes into that. So I think really being able to demonstrate where the value of this technology and these tools come from in terms of supporting you through that. Nobody wants to spend hours and hours converting orders into cases, into pallets, into layers, into pallets on vehicles. You want to be able to do some of that scenario planning. So anything that can make that process easier for people and talk to them about how that's built. I think that's how you change that culture. What's in it for me? What else am I going to be able to do with my time? So it's not a replacement, it's where can you really add value?
Yeah, and I think that storytelling that you just mentioned and that communication flow from bottom to top and top to bottom is super important, because I'm sure you've all seen the stats. You'll get a piece of research from Harvard which will say that 95% of enterprise level AI programs fail. And then you'll see something else that says, but 83% of people on the shop floor are using AI on a day-to-day basis to help them do their job more effectively. So I think that communication flow and that openness about how do we solve real business problems, and actually, what would make your life better, is absolutely key. So thinking about that, thinking about you talking about, using data, using tools more effectively. Coming back to you, Paul, what would what would be a good first step? What have you seen where data and tooling can sort of make a bit of a difference relatively quickly?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things I'd say. I mean, there's the first thing I think in any of this journey and this conversation is what data have we got today, which is often a difficult question to answer, although the data exists somewhere. But actually, in lots of organizations, having been able to get your arms around that and understand what that data is not easy. So there's a baseline kind of process to understand what you're doing now, which in my view everybody should be doing anyway, because it's quite hard to measure any benefits or anything that might change if you don't know where you are. It's a fairly basic point, but we fall down on that a lot by not knowing whether things work, because we don't know. We might not know where we are today. I think there's something. I mean, there's this kind of curiosity about what's out there from a data perspective, and the good thing about data, I think, and data solutions to things is, it's quite easy to try. You don't, if you want to automate a warehouse, you can't just kind of, you're either in or you're out, and you can do lots of proof of concepts and things. But if you're going to take all of your processing area and you're racking out and replace it with robots, you're going to do that, and that happens. I think in this space, it's much more nuanced, that you can take some activities, you can take, this being a good example of, how do you plan labor? You can try this, you can trial this, you can find a provider who, and what we're talking about with data, I think the bit that really struck me when I started thinking about this more is that journey from spreadsheets to the kind of solutions we're talking about today it's a big leap technologically. I mean, the outcome of it will end up being a better outcome of similar things, but it's a big leap from the the feeds from the customers or the spreadsheets and the multiple spreadsheets and all of that stuff to a world where you've got tens of thousands of feeds into something that's working live, that's replanning for you, that's doing the what if scenarios for you when you need them, not in 3 days time or whatever. So I think there's something about that. I think you have to understand what the could be situation looks like. What is the power of this stuff? And then I think in simple terms, I think for a lot of businesses, the opportunity is to just trial something, because it's quite hard to conceptualize this stuff. You can go, yeah, it's all going to be great, and you can be, no, you're not doing a sales pitch today, Steph, but the people can be overwhelmed by that stuff a little bit. That there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of smart things going on, but what is it really going to do? And there's nothing to stop anybody really researching what's out there, finding something that you think looks interesting, and trying it. And you can try it alongside what you did before to see, is it really having the benefit? So you can get some real life, fairly economically, you can get some real life tests of this stuff to figure out, is it going to work for me? If I but I think you've got to do the first bit first. You've got to do the culture and everything first, because when you get to that point of trialing something, I think everybody needs to be on board.
Yeah.
That we accept the premise of why we're doing this. We accept what it's going to do. Otherwise, like lots of these things, you'll have lots of people stood on the sideline and say, well, that's not going to work. And even worse, make sure it doesn't work, because they're not on the journey and they haven't been stakeholder properly, and we haven't got the hearts and minds of people in the right place.
I think that's super important. I think you're exactly right in terms of culture. I think as well, a couple of things you said resonated with me. The first thing is start where you are and know where you are. I think I always think the organizations I come across where I feel you've got a chance to change are the ones where they're not going to let perfect get in the way of good.
Yeah.
And they'll often start the conversation with, our data's not very good, or our data's very siloed. And yet I also know from my background in technology that a lot of times you've got CTOs and CIOs who are trying to make the case for data without having specific use cases in mind. So they'll say, we need a data lake. Good CIOs generally don't say that, but they'll say we need a data lake, and someone will say, what's the business case? What's the use case? And there's a gap there. I think the operational people in this context can really help and say there's some very specific use cases here, but let's start with where we are in data, and I can help you prove the case for improving our data by picking a very tight area to focus on. And I think your point about trial, it's such a new area in terms of AI, and agentic AI, which we talk about a lot, really only started to be searched about in a term in January this year. So I think what we've got to, what we're thinking about is, saying to people, where are we? Where do we want to get to? And if we can pilot something, we need to be able to prove a business case in probably 2 or 3 months. In 2 or 3 months, we should have an idea if this is going to move the needle for the business. I wouldn't be relying on case studies as much. I wouldn't be relying on, breadth of experience, because it's such a new area. I'd be relying on what can we pilot in 3 months that gives us an idea of, is this going to move the needle, or is this interesting? And I would run it alongside my existing operation. Absolutely. And just compare and contrast. What's better, what's working, not as, let's learn. We're in a learning culture. And I think that, again, the businesses that I come across where I think you've got a chance here to affect some really positive change is where they're curious. Yeah. Now, I think a challenge for them is often they don't have time to be curious because they're so busy delivering. But that again comes back to culture. So just building on the culture, and I know, Sarah, this is something we've spoken about before. I'm thinking more about, how the workforce is changing. I think definitely seeing moves towards more flexibility in terms of shifts, cross-training, diversity. So how can planners, I'm guessing, adapt to keep operations efficient, but also people engaged?
I think that it's a really good point. And as we move into the requirement for more flexibility, when I look at the way most planning models work, they're based on Excel, so they're generally using average rates, so standing picking rates or productivity rates by zone, by area, by chamber. You may, as you're getting a little bit more advanced, start looking at things like the speed to competency or the learning curve of new starters and have a degradation against normal productivity rates. But that doesn't really reflect reality. When you think of the diverse work population we have within the logistics industry or within the world, I'm looking at an industry that has an aging workforce. You've got somebody that's in their early 60s will not be able to necessarily pick as much as somebody in their 30s, or might be able to pick more. Or you've got people coming back and returning from illness, returning to work, and therefore need to have a slightly different metric, if you like, or a slightly different target, or want to work different shift lengths, or if we really want to start focusing on equitable workplaces and being able to bring people in with differing abilities, then this is the kind of technology that helps enables you to do that. Because instead of having an average pick rate for everybody and then seeing how that works and then constantly going back as an operator to say, this plans that I would achieve this, I've only achieved that, why is that? Or well, I've got 30% more new starters than I originally anticipated. Do you know what I mean? Or even where those new starters are within that learning curve. For me, what this system or what this new technology in these systems provide is that ability to be much more flexible, for us to really look at that complexity as part of our modelling, which at the moment, from an Excel spreadsheet perspective, isn't easy to do. You'd end up with a really clunky, challenging, unwieldy beast of a spreadsheet, and they're already like that anyway without adding those different complexities on. And then it also becomes really difficult to track who's done what, how you are capturing that information, how you are demonstrating that you have move people between different activities and tasks. So I think for me, where the technology and the systems are moving now is it means we can actually start to have models that meet the complexity of our operations, but enable us to be much more equitable, much more fair in how we attribute performance measures, really focusing on what reality really looks like. That is a really exciting piece for me. And something that when I talk to, I have a real passion about how we become more flexible and offer more flexible work patterns. It becomes a planner's nightmare if I say, what if we were to do a couple of part-time shifts? And they'd be like, oh my God, you're joking. I'd need another spreadsheet for that. I'd need another whole line for it. It's having that ability to be much more adaptable. And as an industry that runs 24/7, we should be the most flexible industry going. So for me, there's some real opportunities, I think, there from a labour planning perspective to assist and help us to move towards a more equitable business.
Yeah, interesting. We were speaking to a business a couple of weeks ago who have literally hundreds of shift patterns, because that's the way they've tried to recognise, one of the ways they've tried to improve the working lives of their people. And again, just thinking about how you manage the fact that Sarah might only want to do mornings, but not Thursday morning. Paul wants to do, Monday full-time, Tuesday part-time, middle shift, etc. And actually, I think, to go back to something Paul said earlier, you need to focus the tools at what the tools do best. And effectively, for a good tool, this is a big mathematical problem. Whereas for people, it's an incredible cognitive load to try and carry, even with spreadsheets and whiteboards and the like. Are there sectors that you think logistics can learn from in this area? I mean, you see anything outside? You talked about your clients and you've talked about some of your background. Are there any sectors that are probably a bit ahead of the curve here, or are we all in the same boat?
No, I think there are definitely sectors that are ahead of the curve. So things like sectors like retail, like hospitality, they have apps, they have that ability for much more flexible work patterns. I mentioned it earlier, I do find it interesting that as an industry, we run 24/7, often 365 days a year, yet we're still so rigid in our structures and the way we structure our work. So all of my sites run to fixed shift patterns with very limited flexibility. We'll do the whole work request piece and we can make exceptions, but we don't plan for it. And therefore we're really stifling the talent we bring into the industry, the talent that comes and wants to work in logistics, because the next generation of workers aren't necessarily wanting fixed shift patterns. Some people want a total flexible approach. The whole gig economy works on this flexible working patterns. There's also, as people go through different stages of life, you need different levels of flexibility. It might be a permanent thing, it might not be. So you're always going to have people that want that rigid fixed shift pattern of what they're working on, but there needs to be that level of flexibility. And if we're not careful, we end up fishing in this really small talent pool where we exclude some people that could be absolutely brilliant, but we don't necessarily bring them into the operations. I think retail and hospitality have been doing it for years. So using planning tools to match hours to demand and offering that genuine flexibility. For me, logistics can absolutely do the same, but with bells on, because we operate across that 24-hour period. So whether someone wants to work 40 hours in 5 banks of 8, or wants to do 4 banks of 10, or actually every third week I only need to do 20 hours because I've got some caring responsibilities that I'm sharing with other people in the family, that shouldn't matter. If we've got the volume, they've got the talent and the experience, we should be able to match that. And I think for me, this technology now gives us that capability to model flexible work patterns, to test the impact and enable us to still maintain service, to review the cost of it. And I think that's the key bit. It's what else does it bring? What do those scenarios enable us to look at far quicker, so that we can make the industry far more inclusive and future ready. So there's some exciting stuff, I think, there in terms of dragging us out of the dark ages on some of this stuff.
Anything you want to add, Paul?
No, I just thinking that the world and the way we work has got way more complex, even over the last 5 years, even over the last 2 years, and it just keeps getting more complex. And if we don't keep up with how we plan and how we, administer our businesses and look after people through that process,
Yeah.
You know, I think there are going to be some winners and losers in this space. I don't mean from the AI space, but from the end user space. I think you know it's easy to get left behind, and I think people have to be careful of that.
I think it's a real coming together as well, isn't it, of a real business challenge. So we all see the stats about the number of open vacancies in warehouses. We know that, you know, costs went up back in April. Costs are probably going to keep going up because you've got reduced supply and increased demand, because there's an increased demand for warehousing. So you've got a real business need. And then the side of that, as I think Sarah's just really pointed out, you know, you've got people coming into the industry who are not coming into the industry because they've got a perception about what it is to work in this environment. They definitely don't want to work with green screens and old-fashioned tech. It's not very exciting. They don't want to work certain set shift patterns. So I think it's a real opportunity to bring together both a business challenge and also a, you know, societal challenge in many ways. And I think if we can solve that problem, and I'd like to think we're endeavouring to do part of that, Predyktable, then, you know, I think there's a fantastic opportunity. I do think, Paul, to go to your point, I think there will be some winners and losers in this space. And I think it comes back to me again for this, the businesses that are curious and are open to learning will be the ones that flourish.
Yeah.
So final area really, and I've put it on my notes as the next frontier, which always makes me think of Star Trek and the final frontier. So apologies if I'm thinking of spaceships at the moment. Looking ahead, Paul, you called this out, you know, the rate of change, 5 years, 2 years, you know, let's just think we used to live in a world before tariffs, if we can all remember that far back. I guess looking ahead, what are you most excited or curious about in terms of the opportunities for labour planning? Sarah, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I think I've touched on some of it. Most excited about some of the things that we can do now, having the tools to enable us to properly crack that flexible working, and therefore bringing more talent into the workforce, tapping into that next generation of talent. And I think the other thing that excites me is how technology in general is changing the roles and logistics. So if you think about the role changes in the last few years, 10 years ago, no one had even heard of data engineers. And now that we're all recognizing the power of data and how essential that is. And I think for me, it's around that we've almost gone from not having the right data to almost having too much data and not being able to interpret it and not being able to act on it. So for me, that having that ability to use real life data and planning, but having creating more skilled roles and opportunities, analytical roles, but still harnessing that power of people, that power of the knowledge and the experience, and partnering that with the technology, with the information to drive us more towards better solutions. That's the sort of stuff I think for me changes. It's like the next evolution. We've gone from, you know, not much development happening in logistics to quite a lot of robotics and automation. And for me, this is the next part of that. It's that next phase from a planning perspective.
Okay, thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I just think the world isn't going to get any simpler, I don't think. Unless anybody knows more than I do, I don't think it's going to get a lot simpler. So these challenges are going to continue to be there. I think the one that Sarah mentioned on, you said it, Steph, that there's lots of vacancies. You know, we know for whatever reason, we know it's an industry we're finding it harder to attract people to it. And I think what we're not doing enough of is examining why that's the case. There's a lot of navel gazing on why don't people want to do these jobs, which is a sort of rhetorical question rather than a real question, because there's an answer to all of that, and it's in all the stuff we've talked about. I think it's in what kind of flexibility can we provide for people, what kind of fulfillment can we provide. People don't want to just turn up and do, particularly the you know, I'll sound old, but the younger generations doing the planning the way we do it. You'll never get anybody to do that job, because they'll just look at it and say, why on earth are we doing it like this? There must be something better. So I think there's that, and the constant increase in costs. And you know, I think the opportunity, and I think this is true of all automation, whether it's mechanical automation or technology, is to be really clear about the things you want humans to do, because they're the only ones who can. And then look at the opportunities around that to say, where can I augment that with some things that will make their lives easier? I think that's the approach we should be applying to all of this, whatever kind of automation it is in my view, because thankfully there are still lots of things that only humans can do, and we should value that and support that with technology to help that process and make their lives easier and more fulfilling while they're doing those roles.
Yeah. And one of the things I liked when I met both of you for the first time, you both very quickly started talking about co-workers and people on the shop floor, which is very refreshing. You were very clear about we will live and die by the extent to which we deliver for customers, but part of the way we deliver for customers is through people. And if we don't look after those people and make life better for them and easier for them, then that way danger lies. So thank you both. I'm just gonna have a quick look. I did see a question or comment come through. I'm just going to go, and it was from Chris Klaus. So I'll open this up to both of you. Do you think the culture of the whole business has to change, not just supply chain logistics? If internal use, better collaboration and forecast from commercial teams. If external, better forecast from your client for the 3PL. So I think it's about the culture of change, and whether it's just something that can happen within logistics and supply chain, or whether it has to happen either with your end user, your client, if you're a 3PL, or, for example, your merchandising team, commercial team within a side. Sarah, what's your take on that?
Ultimately, yes. I think if you want this to work, the whole culture has to move. But I genuinely believe that logistics can lead that. So you're not waiting. You don't need to wait until, as you were saying earlier, Steph, you don't need to wait for perfection. You don't need to wait for everybody to get on board. I think there's a piece of logistics can lead into this. They can start that process and then bring others on board. The bit around the data for me, in terms of the data that comes through, you're already using the level of data you've got from your forecast, whether that's coming from a commercial team or whether that's coming from your customer. We're already doing bits to that data to make it into a logistics language or into an operations language. I think what this does is it gives you that ability the technology gives you that ability to manage that data, to review those assumptions, to make those changes, and then that education process and that stakeholder engagement and bringing everybody else on board becomes part of it. So I think ultimately, yes, any cultural change needs everyone to be brought in, but we don't all need to be starting at the same point. So you can start with somebody leading it and taking everybody else on that journey, is my view.
Interesting. Paul, anything from you?
Yeah, I'd just add that, I think in a perfect world, you'd want all elements of that, internal, external, all the way along that chain, all using a similar thought process and be on the same journey. I think Sarah's right. You've got to start somewhere. But I also think even if you don't get the whole thing where you'd want it to be, my sense is there's still lots of opportunity, even if you just ring fence what's happening, because the information might not be great coming in.
Yeah.
But you can deal with it better and you can manage exceptions easier and quicker through that process. So I think there's some and some. I think it's different degrees of value that you would get out of it, depending on how much of that is lined up.
So it's interesting. I was in the Netherlands last week with a business, and it was a 3PL, and they said, we want to have better conversations with customers. And at the moment, we can have good conversations, but they're often based on, incomplete data, anecdotes. If we can have a better data set, we can have better, more open conversations with them about the impact of change, what's happened, where we need to react to a demand which is over and above what we were expected or forecast to deliver. So I think you're right. I think it's interesting. I'm seeing more and more conversations about people in positions like yours helping to lead to change within an organization, whereas in the past, as somebody once described me, he said, I'm in supply chain. He said, Steph, supply chain is like airport parking. Nobody wants it, but we all know we need it, and we'll leave it to the last minute and we'll try and get it as cheap as possible. I think that's changing, and I think people like you are helping to affect that change. So look, thank you for your insights. We've covered quite a lot today across 5 big areas. So, from how data and culture can make planning smarter, how teams can use insights, the culture and the culture change that we believe we need to affect. So I think the big takeaway for me, reflecting on what's being discussed, is that workforce planning is changing, and it's being led by people who care deeply about doing things better. I'd like to think the sort of people that turn up to webinars like this, and I'm very appreciative of those of you who've given your time up. So thank you for being here. We'll be doing another webinar. This is our first webinar in a while, so any feedback you've got, please feel free to find me on LinkedIn, and even if you didn't like it, tell me how we can do better. But we'll be back in late January or early February for our next session. We've got a couple of topics that have already been suggested. One's around managing productivity, including individual productivity. Productivity is a hot topic. And the other, we've sort of touched on it today, is how to blend automated and human workforces and what's involved in planning those two things together. And how do you effectively get an effective human workforce such that you can create a business case for more automation? So if there's anything else you'd like us to explore beyond those two, drop me a line, connect on LinkedIn. We have a newsletter as well, which you will find on our LinkedIn page. We do it monthly. It came out yesterday. Very light touch, AI in logistics, AI in business, and an AI in the broader world. It's meant to be a good summary of what's going on for people, so take a look at that as well. But we're on time. Thank you again so much for your time. Particular thanks to Paul and Boothie for giving up their time this morning, and hope to see you all again soon. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.